Hello, I'm Terry David Mulligan, and this is the Mulligan Stew podcast. Originally, when we started this podcast with associate producers Elliot Garnier and Corey Wood, there was a subtext underneath the title Mulligan Stew podcast. In brackets, it said music, film, food, and wine, because those are the things I was doing interviews on and doing as part of my life. Wine kind of got set aside. I host a show and have done for 15, 16, 17 years called Tasting Room Radio. Started in a studio in a barn on the Naramata Bench in the Okanagan of British Columbia. Those of you not familiar with that area just know that the wines are incredible and they're getting better and better every year. The world is still to discover the Okanagan simply because they can't make enough wine. But the wines they make are fabulous. And we drink most of it right here in the west of Canada. And one of the educators, one of the best trained wine minds that I know is a writer, sommelier, wine judge named Treve Ring. And I'll just introduce her. Her bio really tells you everything you need to know about the person doing the talking. And the region we're going to head for a region in Italy that is the home of Prosecco called Conegliano Valdobbiadene. This is a masterclass right here from Treve Ring. Do enjoy this wine edition of the Mulligan Stew podcast. My name is Terry David Mulligan. This is Tasting Room Radio. We start the show with Treve Ring hosting a Prosecco tasting at the Oak Bay Hotel in the David Foster Foundation room, which of course had a stage in it. If you follow wine at all, you'll know the name Treve Ring. She's a writer, many magazines, online. She's an editor, sommelier, a speaker, a wine judge, is very much a key member of the Wine Align team, the wonderful wine anorak, Gizmondi on wine. If you're having a wine competition, you want Treve Ring to be in on the tasting so you get it right and you have credibility. When she's in Canada, she lives in Victoria, but she travels the year round. She tastes all over the world and sometimes isn't home for a month because she just goes from destination to destination. And she's the perfect person to host this tasting because these 8 wineries in Italy, for the most part, do not have representation. Who better to speak on your behalf than Treve Ring? Now, this was very special, really special. There is a region in the north of Italy, very within sight of the Alps. It's so famous and special, it's a World Heritage Site. It's called Conegliano Valdobbiadene, and it's famous for the home of Prosecco, where it all started. Some of the vines are incredibly old and very difficult growing conditions as they work their way up the side of hills, through gullies and around rocks and hazards, as it were. It's really tough farming. But the reason why they're there is simply because the Prosecco grape, the Glera, grows exceptionally well there. And the best Proseccos in the world can be found from that region. Now, we have 8 Proseccos that we're going to taste at this tasting. None of them are available in Canada, but they can be if we can start a buzz about these 8 wines and all of their next-door neighbors. On our website, with the help of Corey Wood, we have listed the 8 wines that we are tasting in order so that you can make a note, make a list, go back and reference it when you see the Prosecco section of your store. And let's all find out more about Prosecco, what we thought was Prosecco. When you taste the real deal, your little eyes will roll up into the back of your head. It's fantastic. We welcome, for I believe the very first time, Treve Ring to Tasting Room Radio. This is Tasting Room Radio. I'm Terry David Mulligan, and my guest is Treve Ring. And I started to write down, I ran out of ink in the pen writing down credits, but I did get as far as writer, editor, wine judge, speaker, Wine Align, wonderful connection, wine anorak, Gizmondi on wine, traveler, sommelier, and self-described geek. Is there more?
No, I think you got it. Emphasis on the geek part.
Geek from day one kind of thing?
Yeah, I've always been interested in wine. I started off as a food writer, more than 20 years ago, and I was much more interested in what was in the glass than what was on the plate, so quickly turned that around, and wine ever since.
Did this come from family or just out?
No, not at all, just curiosity. I love travel, so it was an easy find.
There was no course in school, was there?
No course in school, but as soon as I found an interest in wine in my early 20s, I started taking wine classes, and my very first wine teacher was Mark Davidson.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. I was really lucky, so I got taught by the best pretty early.
Was the first wine Australian?
I don't think so. I think it was Riesling, and that kind of all kicked it all off. I mean, Riesling is pretty easy to fall in love with.
How long did it take you to discover, Prosecco?
Well, I mean, we would have had it in very first Wine 101 class, and it's so easy to like, right? When you're learning about wine, you have know nothing. It's like, oh, sparkling wine, and it's this approachable and this easy, and yeah, I like this.
I was thinking about its place in the world of wine, because that's what we're dealing with here. We've got eight wines to taste, but its place, because first of all, bubble has had a wonderful resurgence. Champagne leading the charge. However, if I'm not mistaken, Prosecco is a very close second, if not a first most popular bubble being consumed today. We just got to wonder who's Prosecco.
That's a very good point. I mean, the Prosecco rise has been astronomical around the world, as we know, and everyone from new wine geeks like me 20 years ago to ladies who lunch to people on picnics. But I mean, Prosecco is a wine that people know the name of. It's relatively affordable. It's easy to find. It's charming and friendly. It's very easy to enjoy. The challenge is, and that's why I was here today, is to talk about the next level of Prosecco, like serious Prosecco. And a lot of people think all Prosecco is the same, not realizing that there's a pyramid of Prosecco, and as you climb, you are rewarded.
It's interesting. It's an interesting point you make, because it has done extremely well. It's the sales extremely popular, but we know almost nothing of the internal structure of Italy and Prosecco and what goes into that bottle. We see knockoffs. They can't quite pull it off, and they don't even come close in some cases. But you just took us through 8 Proseccos that we would die to have on our table. They're not available yet. And that's the question I asked you at the end. Why these 8? Are they representing all Proseccos?
Right. So, I mean, you can go to any store, any bottle shop, and buy a bottle of Prosecco, D.O.C.G Prosecco. And the wines we were showing today are from a very small region, the heartland of Prosecco, between Conegliano and Valdobbiadene, and they're Prosecco Superiore, D.O.C.G. So out of all of the Proseccos, the ocean of Proseccos that are produced in the world that people are familiar with, there's just a small pinnacle at the very top from the heartland of Prosecco. And these have much more stringent rules, much more, lower yields, higher level of attention, higher level of farming and care. And these are the wines we're showing today. So they're not on our market because they were shipped over from Italy just for us.
Will we, if we make enough fuss, will we see them?
We are seeing more and more Conegliano Valdobbiadene, Prosecco Superiore, D.O.C.G, the top of the pyramid on this market, just not in abundance because, a few different reasons. Most people don't know what the difference is between paying more for this type of Prosecco versus paying, less for a lower grade of Prosecco, a lower category. So it's up to, the people in the room, the agents, the sommeliers, the wine geeks like you and me, to spread the word.
Were they not interested in North America, or at least this part of the world? Were they wined and dined, for example, in the UK, and there was really no need to pay attention to us? And why now? Why are they starting to show this interest now?
Well, I think because, out of every 100 bottles of Prosecco sold around the world, only 16 of them are of this D.O.C.G status. So it's a small amount to begin with. So it doesn't reach everywhere. And if agents are just trying to bring in the lowest common denominator for their markets, they're just going to go with regular Prosecco. And if consumers don't know the difference, they're not going to ask for anything more. So it's kind of a two-way street. We need agents to bring in these wines. We need, Italy and Prosecco to be interested in shipping them to us and having Canada as a market. But we also need the consumers to ask for them, to realize there's more out there.
You know how easy it is to put Prosecco on a shelf, because it can be done. Mm-hmm. The tricky part with these 8 and the rest that may follow is that, first of all, the labels are a little tough to read or pronounce, as I'll show you later, but also the expense. You have to convince people to think beyond the label and think about what's in the bottle and where they came from. And more importantly, as you see now in the Okanagan, we're talking about plots of land now. Now we're getting specific. These plots of land have been in play since the 1800s.
Yeah, absolutely. And viticulture has existed in these hills in Conegliano Valdobbiadene for thousands of years. I mean, these are ancient plots. And when you see the photos and you see how steep these are, like there's no way even a human can regularly walk up there. They have to transport grapes in baskets on trolleys. It's so steep, up to 70% grade, which is pretty extreme. There was a stat that I mentioned that I thought just fascinating. For every Prosecco from Conegliano Valdobbiadene, the steep D.O.C.G region, it takes about 600 hours to farm over a year, whereas on the flats, it's about 150 hours. So the man hours.
There's 3,000 growers, but I noticed the line that went by heroic type of viticulture.
Heroic viticulture, that's what they call it. Because, you can imagine, you're at the top of these very, very steep hills. You slip.
No horses, no tractors.
No way, absolutely. Barely humans.
But perfect.
Oh, for handcrafted wines, this is exactly what this is all about.
You poured today extra brut, extra dry, and dry. Mm-hmm. We may not see all of them on a shelf gathered, but just take us through those 4.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when people think of traditional Prosecco, it often has, a little bit of sweetness to it. That has been the tradition since the beginning. Now we're seeing a lot more drier styles on the market, just like everyone is losing sugar in their wines. And, it's a little bit confusing because the driest style is actually called extra brut. And that's, from 0 to 6 grams per liter of residual sugar. Then you come up to 0 to 12 grams, and you have brut, and people are used to hearing about brut. And then we even move up the scale a little bit to extra dry, which actually has more amount of residual sugar, and that's the traditional Prosecco that you think of that's, off dry, beautiful aromas of pear and peach, florals. And then we finished today with the dry style, which actually has the most amount of residual sugar. So you can imagine, they're Italian, everything is a little bit convoluted, it's completely backwards. When you see dry on a label of Prosecco or any sparkling wine around the world, it actually has a lot of residual sugar to it. If you want something that is really dry with a low amount of sugar, you want to look for extra brut. Extra brut, bruto. It is dry and severe, extra brut.
Our guest is the absolutely fabulous Treve Ring, writer, educator, sommelier, and world-class wine judge. We are here to discover the truly incredible epicenter of Prosecco wines in a pocket of the world called Conegliano Valdobbiadene. Tasting Room Radio, Terry David Mulligan. Treve Ring. It's Treve Ring. She didn't have to fly anywhere. She didn't even have to take a ferry. She's in Oak Bay, just mere steps from her place in Victoria. We're constantly flying and going to tastings and doing stories. How did you handle the 2 years of lockdown?
Oh, that's a good question. Thank goodness for wine, Terry. It was very challenging not to fly. I used to fly more than half the year. I was on the road, and mostly internationally. So when everything shut down, I was in Europe in March 2020, and everything was shutting pretty quick, so I came back. And since then, I've been fortunate that I've been able to still taste, albeit from the Treve House here in Victoria. So I do a lot of my tastings. I get a lot of wines in. Been tasting every day, which is great. I've logged a lot of tasting notes, and I'm anxious to get back out on the road.
I want to talk about these 8 wines that you poured today. First of all, we need your pronunciation because it can't be mine. It has to be yours. But tell us about the region, and then we'll go to the wines.
Absolutely. So the wines we are pouring today are from the heartland of Prosecco, the traditional place where Prosecco was born in the hills of Conegliano Valdobbiadene, and it's Prosecco Superiore D.O.C.G.
Close to Verona.
Very close to Verona, yep, close to the Alps, perfectly situated in northwest Italy, beautiful area for viticulture.
Is it cool climate?
It is cool climate, especially in the hills. Yeah. I mean, all of these vineyards in Conegliano Valdobbiadene are running east-west, and they're all aspect facing the south. So they're getting the afternoon sun to keep them warm and to keep the grapes producing.
What kind of winter do they have to help?
You know, the winter isn't too bad. I mean, I have been there in December. There was a little bit of snow on the ground. Things are pretty gray, but it's nothing like, you know, Canadian winters for sure. And it's nothing like being in the Alps. We're still in the foothills.
Do you have a favorite of that list?
A favorite of the wines that we tasted today?
I have 2. I just want.
Oh, okay. I was really impressed by the second wine we tasted, the Conte Ponte Rosso non-vintage Conegliano Valdobbiadene Prosecco Superiore D.O.C.G. Extra brut. As we know, most Prosecco in the world has a good, you know, a fair amount of residual sugar, giving it an off-dry persona. This particular wine only had 2 grams per liter of residual sugar, definitely very much in the extra brut category, and it was really nice to taste this serious wine without having a cloak of residual sugar. And it, interestingly, had 15%, up to 15% other grapes in addition to Galera. It had Bianchetta and Valdezio. So that adds just a little something, a different perfume, something different to the mix.
Okay. The nose on 4.
Yes, Perlage.
The nose.
So good. What a fantastic family as well. The Nardi brothers, there's 7 of them, and they're the region's first certified organic winery in all of Prosecco. They work really hard, fantastic family, beautiful farming, very precision agriculture, and I thought that wine, their Canna bottling, the non-vintage, was showing beautifully today.
So if it's in fact this Galera grape, 100%, I don't think it was a blend.
No, that one was 100%.
100%. Right. Is it the terroir? Is it the soil? Is it the way they handle it?
You know, there's a lot of different things that go into it. The soil, the aspect, the altitude. They're farming at, you know, quite a lot of altitude. Galera is autochthonous to the region, so it's been growing there for thousands of years. And as such, different Galera has, mutated over the years. There's lots of different, not particularly clones, but different variations of Galera. And it's been really cool to see. I mean, most of the wines we tasted today were 100% Galera, save for that Conte Calato that we just talked about.
I wrote good funky. I wrote funky, and then I wrote good funky. It's very funky. No, I
have bad funky, so good funky. I
love that. And number 6 was I just loved Bianca.
Yeah, so that is a special wine. It's a Riva, so that means it's from a single vineyard. The Bianca Vigna Riva de Colato 2020. So extra dry. Yeah. So as we talked about, you know, means more residual sugar. It's the opposite of what it's saying.
Can be sweetened, a sweetener.
It can even go sweeter than extra dry to dry. But that wine was showing beautifully, again, from a single vineyard. That Riva de Colato is a very, very warm Riva, single vineyard within Prosecco, and I thought the wine showed really well. Even though it had, you know, a good deal of residual sugar, the acidity was there to totally match.
Treve, tell me about number 1, La Farah.
Oh, La Farah. So a beautiful producer. Again, this was a Riva, so a single vineyard farm. La Farah is a family operator. They want to produce like in the highest parts of the Appalachians. So they're reaching for altitude. So their wines are always so fresh and lively and vibrant.
The set rules, the book of rules for this area must be pretty tough. Mm-hmm. Can they mess with the blend a bit, or is it all traditional?
They can mess with it a little bit. I mean, it's all based on the Galera grape, the one that's been growing there for forever. But they can have up to 15% of these other indigenous grapes, as well as the Pinots. So you can invite in Pinot Bianco, Pinot Grigio, Pinot Nero into the blend. And if you're making a sparkling wine, because yes, there are some still wines made in Prosecco, but if you're making a sparkling wine, you also can include Chardonnay and Chardonnay. Sorry.
Have we talked about the Belenda San Fermo?
We haven't. Belenda is a fairly new winery. I mean, new-ish. They've been around for more than 20 years, but a husband, wife team, and now it's their children as well. The San Fermo 2021. Conegliano Valdobbiadene. I thought that one was one of the most, had the most typicity for Prosecco. You know, if you get it on a blind tasting exam, you're like, this is Prosecco. So well balanced, so perfumed, just classic Prosecco.
I've heard this conversation about, Prosecco is not champagne. Well, that's right. And champagne is not Prosecco. I think the point was being made that it doesn't have to be paired. It can stand alone on its own, Prosecco. So let's deal that as a two-part question. Does it do well standing alone? And when you do pair, what's the local food like where these wines are being made? Maybe that tells us.
Excellent questions. I mean, I think these wines stand alone for sure as a beautiful aperitif, especially the ones that have a little bit more residual sugar. Maybe they're not as easy to pair with everyday food here on the West Coast. One type of food that I really love, and not from the region in Northwest Italy, but these are beautiful wines to have with Thai food or Vietnamese food. When you're thinking about the beautiful fragrant flavors and aromas of those cuisines, and you want something, that has some acid to carry, and refresh the palate, these wines are so perfect with those sorts of foods.
It's got to have some structure because Thai food can completely take over your mouth.
So much. And you saw today, like even the wines that had, some considerable residual sugar, like 15 degrees, 18 degrees, they had so much acidity.
Isn't Veneto the home of ham?
There's a lot of gorgeous ham and jamon and everything in that region. Again, those sort of things, when you think of prosciutto and melon, you've got the salty, you've got the sweet. What do you want to have with that? Maybe something that has some sweetness and some acidity. Like these are just natural, what grows together goes together.
We may have shortchanged 7 and 8 here. Let's do the last two on the list.
Sure, absolutely. So the Cantina Bernardi Terre de Roux from a small spot. Interesting that it's an extra dry. So again, more residual sugar, but still a lot of great acid. 2021, so still young and fresh. These are wines that when people see, extra dry, or they think of maybe Prosecco is going to be too sweet. No, you have to try these very serious examples, the D.O.C.G, the top of the pyramid, to see how these artisans are handling the style. And of course, the last one we had, the Riccardo non-vintage Conegliano Valdobbiadene. Gorgeous, a dry example. So the most residual sugar of any of the ones we had. But if you were having, again, a fruit plate, or you were having a light dessert, and you want something lighter to pair with it, especially a fruit dessert, these are the wines that you want to have at the table.
Val di Ovo, Zeranove, 2021. I wrote balanced because it just had the nose, the palate. It had balance. Somebody had taken the time to make this balanced.
I agree. And it was a brut, so the sugar and the acid was well in check, as you mentioned. Very small producer. I mean, as we talked about, the average holding in this D.O.C.G of Conegliano Valdobbiadene is only 2.5 hectares. Sure. Like, people are really invested in their vineyards. It's not like some big giant operations. It's not some tank farms like in other sparkling wine regions around the world. This is handcrafted viticulture and from a very sustainably farmed region.
I wrote these notes. Primary and secondary fragrances, fruity floral aromas, sustainability, organics, hogback, and patchwork.
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2019, this region was granted UNESCO heritage status for a wine region because of the it's so different than any other wine region by topography and also by the small little patchwork of families.
And history
for sure. So these hogbacks, these like long east-west vineyard rows that are getting the afternoon sun. That is very unique to this area. And all of these steep vineyards, they need to be terraced. But unlike the Douro Valley or the Moselle, where you have terraces made out of stone, these are all terraces of grass called ciglione. And that is very unique to this area. It helps protect against erosion. You don't want all that dirt rolling down the hill. But it has bine practiced in this area since the 16th century.
Cellaring.
So unlike typical D.O.C. Prosecco, these are more long, livid wines. That said, they are meant to be consumed, when they're relatively young. These aren't champagnes or traditional method wines that you're laying down for a decade or more.
Cellaring here in Vancouver Island, British Columbia, in Canada, is the drive from the store to the house.
And that's your aging period. And then you crack it. It's very true. We don't have that sort of history, and we don't really have a lot of space. Our typical houses here, condos, they're tiny.
But will we appreciate what we have rolling around in the back seat?
Well, I hope so. And I hope that when you understand, the man hours and the steepness of the terrain and the history of a region like this, you realize why it's not just any old sparkling wine. This is, there's only one small region in the world that can be Conegliano Valdobbiadene.
If these wines were to show up here, that's a two-part question. Can they show up if we show an interest? And B, what would the average price point be?
Oh, great question. There are some D.O.C.Gs on this market now. They're rare, but there are definitely some that you can buy. Hopefully more are coming when more people like us spread the word about these amazing wines. It'll take the agents to bring them in. Yeah. But if, say, the average bottle of D.O.C.G Prosecco, regular Prosecco, is $20 on this market, maybe 15 to 20, these are going to be coming in more like 25. So when you think about 600 man-hours per year per wine in steep, heroic viticulture, and, ancient grapes and all these soils, it's not so bad.
You took the words right out of my mouth. What's going to keep you busy this year? What do you think?
Well, I've already booked Europe for next month, so I'm heading back over for my first time in 2 years.
And we get a Vancouver International Wine Festival.
I will be in Germany at that time because it's the same week as Provine. Okay. So unfortunately, I'm going to be missing Van Wine Fest for the first time in a long time.
And you miss Top Drop.
And I'm going to miss Top Drop as well.
Okay, fine, but that's the choice you make. How do people find you? How do they follow you?
I'm available on social media pretty easy. There's not that many Treve Rings out in the world, so as long as you get the spelling right, pretty easy to find.
We'll give them the spelling as well. Thank you very much. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Terry. Good to see you as always.
Treve Ring on the Mulligan Stew podcast. If she enjoyed the experience, I intend to go back and knock on her door and say, can we do something maybe else? Treve Ring, wonderful writer, wine judge, wine mind, spokesperson for wine and for people and food and the world in general. Lives an honorable life, does Treve Ring, and spends much of it at 30,000 feet heading somewhere else. Thank you, Treve. Now, what next on the Mulligan Stew podcast? Well, I'm working on a special about Red Robinson, the last DJ. The guy who was in the chair in Vancouver as the mid-50s showed up. And through his studio and in front of his microphone came Elvis and Fats Domino and Little Richard and Chuck Berry and Jerry Lee Lewis and the Everly Brothers and all of them, the whole history of early rock and roll. The Beatles, Red was the guy, so much so that he is now enshrined in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, Ohio. So that's coming. Oh, there is an interview coming with Mike Scott, the writer, lead singer, and founder of the Waterboys. That's on May the 7th, that weekend. And we're digging back into the archives and finding some interviews. As a matter of fact, I moved recently, and I found old videotapes, some of them VHS. If I can get the audio off them, we have some really good archival interviews coming as well, so watch this space. Please consider subscribing on Spotify, Google Play, or Apple Podcasts. Appreciate it very much. Be safe out there. Thank you. Happy Easter.